Slow Steven is the 13th episode of Season 19 of Thomas & Friends. It was written by Helen Farrell and narrated by Mark Morahan. Here's the story. Steven is on his way to pick up some visitors when he hears a strange creaking sound at the suspension bridge. At Knapford, he asks Thomas and James if they've heard it, but neither of them have. Steven then hears the creaking sound again when he crosses the bridge to travel to Brendam Docks. When he crosses it for a third time, he realizes that the bridge is about to collapse. He stops Thomas from crossing it and goes back to warn Gordon about it. He gets his wheel stuck on a broken rail for a moment, but he manages to free it and stops Gordon just in time as the bridge collapses. The Fat Controller congratulates Steven for his bravery, and the episode ends with Gordon having to go as slow as Steven while the bridge is being repaired, and Steven becoming more popular at the castle. So what's notable about this episode? Well, it's really only notable for marking the first time the Sodor suspension bridge collapses since its debut in Calling All Engines, as well as marking Steven's only appearance in Season 19. I love this episode. For me, this is Steven's best episode by far. Season 19 in general had great animation, but this episode has some of the best I've ever seen, period, let alone in Thomas. The amount of effort put into the suspension bridge shows how dedicated Arc Productions was, and it's such a shame that they went bankrupt in 2016. Helen Farrell was a fairly new writer for the show at this point, but most of the episodes she wrote were pretty solid, and this episode is no exception. Steven is written perfectly in this episode, with that comedic genius side to his character when he teases Gordon and James, as well as his determined side, showing that he's willing to risk his own life to help someone in need. It's basically how Toby was portrayed in Toby Had a Little Lamb. It's a bit of a shame, however, that after this episode, Steven became a bit butchered ever since Glyn arrived at the castle at the end of Season 20. But it was rather minor compared to how characters like Edward or Skarloey were butchered in the hit era. So what else is good about this episode? The music. Robert Hartshorn does a stellar job with the score for this episode. I love Steven's theme here, and the music during the climax is really intense and really captures the danger of the moment. The scene where Steven gets stuck on the broken rail makes the scene even more suspenseful because it makes you wonder if he'll make it or not. The voice acting is also brilliant. Bob Golding gives it all with his performance as Steven, particularly in these two clips.
Stop, Gordon! Stop! Come on, Gordon! Rocket coming through!
Also, as a side note, I find it hilarious that Steven goes over the bridge despite Thomas wanting to. Thomas inserts himself in pretty much every story in Season 19 to the point where I'm sick of his presence. So to have him shoved aside in the most blatant way possible is both satisfying and hilarious to me. It's as if the writers actually realised that Thomas doesn't have to do everything just because he's the main character. In conclusion, Slow Steven is a fantastic episode that I feel isn't as praised as much as it should be. Not only does it have a heavy amount of suspense and intensity, but it has a brilliant script, fantastic animation, and stellar voice acting. I really do love Steven's character, and because this episode brings out every side of him that I love, I consider it not just the best Steven episode, but also the best episode of Season 19. I give this episode a 10 out of 10. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.